afternoon, Justice Fisher.
Hello, Judge Doherty.
I thank you for coming today to participate in our video commemoration for the 40th anniversary of the Housing Court. Now, I know you've got a lot of experience in Housing Court, and I'd like to go back to your career prior to becoming a judge. What were your experience in Housing Court?
Well, I was an attorney with legal services. I started January of 1979. So not quite the entire 40 years, but close to it, only in Manhattan.
And what was Housing Court like in Manhattan when you were a practitioner here?
Well, maybe not as chaotic as the Bronx and Brooklyn, but it was quite a chaotic scene. We had the old Part 49, which was always crowded and noisy and chaotic and very difficult to manage for someone who was not represented by an attorney.
When did you become a Housing Court judge?
In 1989, March of 1989.
So for 10 years, you were actually practicing in Housing Court?
I was in and out because I went to the Attorney General's for a few years. But yes, I did housing pretty much that entire time.
Now, when you were appointed to the bench in Housing Court, did you see any changes from when you practiced there to when you actually became a judge?
No, not at all. It was the same court from 1979. The only difference for me is that I was exposed to the other counties. I had never actually seen Housing Court in the Bronx and Brooklyn until I was appointed a Housing Court judge. So until Judge Rubin assigned me to a county, I actually went and sat with judges in the Bronx and judges in Brooklyn, before he actually assigned me to Brooklyn.
And what was Housing Court like back in 1989?
Well, 1989, it's as busy as it is now. The numbers haven't changed that much, considerably. 141 Livingston is still the courthouse we're in. And, there's still some inherent problems with that building. And I think what I could say changed dramatically from 89 to now would be mostly in Queens with the diversity. Queens was not a diverse county back in 1989. Now, as you know, we have so many different cultural groups in Queens, and that's a big difference. Right. Yeah. Brooklyn has always been diverse, but the types of groups have changed. We have more Russian, more Polish in Brooklyn than we did back in the old days.
As far as the actual resources in the court, were there any changes from the time you started practicing in 79, say up until the initiative was passed in 97?
Not really, except Judge Rubin during the time when I started till the time the initiative came in, was able to give Housing Court judges their own court attorneys. Originally, they didn't have court attorneys, so he put that in. Judge Rubin also put in the postcard rule, the first postcard rule, and so that was a change. There were no other major changes during that time period.
Some of the judges that we've interviewed that have been on the bench for a long time, or have been practicing for almost 40 years, had indicated originally when they were on the bench there was just the judge and the court officer. There wasn't even a clerk.
There wasn't a clerk either. That's right.
Was that also implemented by Judge Rubin?
I believe the clerk was also. Clearly the court attorneys were, and I'm pretty positive the clerks were as well. So that was a big change. So more resources in the courtroom. The initiative increased the resources even more in the courtroom.
Let's talk a little about the initiative. I know you were the supervising judge here in Manhattan when it was implemented.
No, I was the administrative judge.
Were you? Okay.
I was in charge of the whole shebang when it came in. Assisted in, developing it, along with Judge Fow and Barbara Millet, who was in counsel's office then, I believe, and now she's at the Judicial Institute. I was appointed the administrative judge in October of 96. I actually took charge late December 1996, and somewhere around mid-January 1997, I was called in by the chief administrative judge, who was then our chief, who's now our chief judge, Judge Jonathan Lippman, and he said, we would like to overhaul Housing Court completely. And that's the start of the initiative.
How do you think the initiative changed or had an impact on the Housing Court?
Well, certainly it changed the culture a bit. We eliminated Part 18, the old Part 49, because it had become Part 18 by then. And so the way cases started changed, and that was a dramatic change. And Part 18, Part 49 had inherent problems. It was always crowded. It was inhumane, I thought, in terms of, people standing and babies crying. I also thought it was, at least from my viewpoint, some attorneys were able to manipulate where their cases were sent. And so the initiative changed that, eliminated that cattle call calendar part, and started the cases, initially with the judge that the case was assigned to. I think dividing the task between settlement and trials was remarkable. And I believe that came from Judge Fow. It becomes a little blurry as to who came up with what idea, because it really was a report that we worked on together. But I think that came from Judge Fow. And I think that's made a difference. I think we're much better at trials than we were back in 1996. We get trials done. We don't have the backlog we used to have. If you remember the old days, and unfortunately I know you do remember the old days where you could get a trial for one day and it would be another a month or two before you could go back to trial. We do, not the best job of contiguous trial dates, but mostly contiguous trial dates. And I think that was a major change. Clearly, the resources that we put into the court system in terms of access to justice issues changed. My big thing, and I will claim credit for this, is taking the formerly known as pro se attorneys from behind windows and putting them into offices where they could sit and actually look at the litigants that they were helping, increasing the number of pro se attorneys. We call them help center attorneys now. That changed, and I think that made a big difference. Those kinds of initiatives evolved as New York City evolved. When the homeless population increased, the zip code part came as a result of the increase in the homeless shelter, and the city reaching out to United Way of New York to sort of fund it. And I came up with the proposal for the zip code part, and we were able to fund it. So that's where that came from. But that was driven by a social need. What was the other thing you mentioned besides the zip code part?
Having a welfare.
Oh, the welfare, the public assistance liaison. It just made sense.
Mm-hmm.
It just made sense to actually have them here in the courthouse. And now, they make their home here, and it makes a big difference on how we process cases. But we now also have the assigned counsel projects, so we have people from the Department of Aging here, and a bunch of other services.
Also, is there a volunteer lawyer or a lawyer?
Well, we have both. We have volunteer lawyer, which is lawyers that sit in the help center to provide advice only, and then we have volunteer lawyer for the day, and they provide representation in the courts. And we have the guardian ad litem program. Prior to 1997. We didn't put the guardian ad litem program in until 2000, I think 5, maybe 6. The guardian ad litems came from a list that the city of New York maintained, but those individuals were never trained or really supervised by the city. So at some meeting where we were sitting down to talk about the problem with the city and the city bar, who used to do some training, somehow I ended up with a program. And the rest is history. Exactly. But I think that's made a difference in guardian ad litems, who now have training, supervision, and some social work support as well.
Mm-hmm. Some of us, in discussing the housing court, reasons it was created and what its goals were, there was a certain group of people who felt that the primary purpose of our housing court was to maintain the housing stock, to make sure that we enforce and uphold the housing maintenance code. Others, of course, argued that it was just created as a rent collection agency for landlords.
Well, I think the legislative history will bear out that it was meant to, erase the standard of the housing stock. And if you look back at the legislative history, which I've done, that's why it was put in. Yeah.
And how effective do you think the HP part has been over the years?
Well, I think our numbers would indicate that the public is not using it to the extent that it could. Now, there's lots of reasons for that. Lack of resources, and people are also fighting paying their rent, so it's hard to be affirmative and come in and start an HP action. But our numbers are, compared to our overall filing, very low.
Do you also think it has to do with budget cuts that are affecting HPD's ability to
I think
be a better enforcer?
Budget cuts affect everybody's ability to do the best that we can, and that's from the court system and from HPD, from all the agencies that we deal with, federal, state, and local.
One of the attorneys that we interviewed felt really the only criticism of the initiative would be that part of the goal was to get people out of the hallways and into the courtroom.
We still haven't done that. And there's lots of reasons for that. We don't have enough resources to get everybody out of the court hallways. We've put in programs such as RAP to make sure that the what goes on in the hallways are more of an even playing field. That helped. But you'd have to have triple, quadruple the number of court attorneys that we have now to actually get everybody out of the hallways. And I mean, to a certain extent, we have to give litigants, the right to determine their own destiny and to talk to the other side earlier in the morning so they can possibly get home to their children and jobs. We do understand that, but no, we haven't done the best we could possibly do in getting people out of the hallways.
Over the years, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and how would you change it?
What didn't work on the initiative was the technology part where we wanted to use electronic calendars. That did not work. And it's because the culture of housing court is pretty much the same as it was in 1979. Attorneys come down with loads of cases. They go from part to part, and you have to chase after them. And that's both tenants attorneys and landlords attorneys. The only people that stay in place usually are the unrepresented litigants. And the way the calendar system was supposed to work, you have to have both people there anyway, so it really just did not work. I still think that more use of technology could be used if we had the budget to do it. One of my ideas, and Judge Kay and I talked about it, was sort of doing the restaurant buzzer system where you get a buzzer and you walk around with it, and when it's your turn, the buzzer goes off. But it costs money to do that. Only the restaurants can afford those buzzer things. So the technology side of it, I don't think worked in terms of the calendar. Other technology things have worked, but not that. So that was a part of the initiative that was never fulfilled. Getting everybody out of the hallways was a lofty ideal, and it was a good idea. But it's not going to work given the volume that we have. But I do think that we conference more cases than we used to. And we certainly are doing a better job, although not a perfect job, of allocating on agreements and things like that. So.
Any changes planned?
No changes, no major changes, no shocking announcements. There's always tweaking to be done. And, you can't project what changes will be needed into even the near future, because New York City is such an eclectic city. We don't know what the next problem is going to be. This year it's bed bugs or mold or, a particular problem in a particular community. It could be lofts. It could be, illegal SROs. We don't know. And as a court that serves the public, we always have to be ready to meet whatever the demands are of our community. So I can't project what's going on. I could never project that we would need substantial French interpreters in the Bronx. But the population's beginning to change in the Bronx. So, when I look at my numbers, I'm like, why are there so many French interpreters? Because we have people that speak French in the Bronx now. And we still don't have enough interpreters. We do understand that. So, in terms of systemic changes, no. Will we always be a work in progress? Absolutely.
I thought there was some discussion, and maybe Mr. Etheridge mentioned it when he was here, that you're trying to rework the HCIS system.
Yes, right.
To sort of bring it more up to date, to provide more information for even outsiders coming to check on calendars. We hope by
the end of the year that will give us more abilities to manipulate the calendar more. It'll be easier, and it'll bring us into the 21st century in terms of computer programming. And I was just told by DOT that we should be done by the end. That's big, but I don't know if that's going to affect people tremendously. I mean, we'll make a difference, but
certainly, if more information could be inputted into the computer, it would certainly assist with the burden of finding files and trying to update yourself on history of the case in order to show causes presented.
That would help. And also, I think our fields are limited right now, and there's information I would like to collect that might tell us how things are going, what things are happening out there in the world, if we just collected a little bit more information, which we can't do in the present system. So hopefully that will make a change. So thanks for pointing that out. That is a change, but not anything that's going to affect the daily lives of practitioners per se.
Is there anything further you'd like to say?
No, I think that, I've said it often, the housing court is still, to me, the most exciting court in the system. It's a court that you could never predict what's going to happen. I've never predicted some of the things that have happened in the city From the time I started as an attorney to taking over as the administrative judge, that would be happening today in New York City. I expect that we will face many more problems into the future because of the nature of the economy and the nature of New York City. But that, we do our best to kind of roll with the punches and address what everybody needs. And, it's a big family. It's judges, it's non-judicial personnel, it's the practitioners and the unrepresented litigants and the owners that we all have to satisfy and meet their needs. And it's tough. It's tough because everybody is actually right now at this point struggling. Everybody. But what the future will bring, I think it depends on what the world brings and what happens in the city of New York. I hope to be here for a while.
I'm sure you will be.